In this week's In-Ear Insights, let's talk about momentum and motivation. So, Katie, in the past couple of weeks, one of the things I've been doing in the evenings is volunteering with this group, doing some advocacy. And one of the things I've observed is that in the beginning, for any kind of cause or something like that, there's a lot of motivation, there's a lot of energy. And then over time, I mean, people can't run at 120% for more than a few days, much less weeks or months, or in the time frame that change is required to occur, like, for example, electing new people to office or changing a company's core values. Things those things are measured on like geologic time frames, almost like years and years to pivot a company, to pivot a culture, to make lasting change. So my question to you is, because I'm watching this in this group of people, and I think this applies very broadly to marketers and companies right now with layoffs and all these things. How do you help someone manage a team so that you maintain motivation and you maintain motivation in a sustainable way? What kinds of systems and processes do you need to have in place so that people can still feel engaged? People still feel like there's a reason to do the thing, but they're not burning out and they're not losing momentum.
Well, and I think you hit upon something really important. Is people can't run at 120% all the time. Like you can do it in short bursts. And I think that that's really part of the, quote unquote secret is, that's not the goal. It's, what do they say? It's a marathon, not a sprint. And so, if this is like a campaign, like you're talking about, that's going to be, that's going to take like a few weeks, a few months, you really need to sort of temper those expectations and, make sure people aren't burning out quickly and then just dropping out of the fight. It's the same thing with the team, especially with all of these tech companies, with all the layoffs. The people who are left are now burdened with 6 more people's jobs and no extra money and no end in sight. And maybe they don't have, the ability to leave this role because it could be devastating to their personal life, financially, whatever. So in my experience, there's a lot of wrong ways to do it. So let's just get some of those out of the way first. Pizza parties, not going to be helpful, because the first thing all of your disgruntled employees are going to think is, well, that's money they could have spent and put back into my paycheck, but thanks for all the pizza. And by the way, I'm vegan, so there's none of those options there. It's executives tend to feel like no, let me show you, you're still part of the team. But when you're actually the employee who's dealing with it, it feels like a slap in the face. It feels like all I'm worth is a pizza party. My job's not that important, and, you couldn't even spring for the good stuff. So don't do that. The forced family fun, all of the activities, the outings, that's not what's needed at this time. When I used to work at a company that we went through the 2008 recession, and so they formed, much like the TV show The Office, they had the party planning committee. And as one of the few remaining employees there, I was on the party planning committee. We had National High Five Day, where it's a thing, where we actually wasted our time and went through and wrote out instructions on the different kinds of high fives that you could give people, and then encouraged people and gave out stickers for the best high fives. Like, it was a stretch trying to get people excited and motivated. Chris, I can see the look on your face, but like, it was desperate times. And those of us who were tasked with creating this activity, we knew it was stupid. We knew that. But we were trying to boost morale. We were trying to generate some excitement, some fun, because we couldn't give them money. We couldn't promise them their jobs. So let's make ourselves look foolish for an afternoon and give people something to like smile about. Was it a great use of time? No, absolutely not. So to your actual question, Chris, of how do you motivate people? It starts with helping them understand what's in it for them. So I was watching something yesterday, and this is not an original quote, but it's like, no act is truly selfless. And the conversation that was being had was, people go out of their way to do selfless things, but it's okay for them to feel good about themselves when they do it. That's what makes it not truly selfless. And so by pulling the team together, getting them to stay motivated, it's okay to remind them what's in it for them as individuals, like what they are getting out of this situation. Because we really try to focus on like, here's the good of the company, here's the good of our customers, here's, the good of the team. And then individuals just sit there, but what about me? What's in it for me? And so that's the first place you need to start. So Chris, in your example, we've been working with this community, I would imagine that the what's in it for me is they would get their content back that they've been fighting so hard to get. Are there other benefits to individuals?
That's a very good question, and not one that I have a great answer for. That's one of the reasons why I brought it up as a topic, because it's a volunteer organization. There's no money, so you literally can't pay people anything, much less pay them more, which is usually one of the easy levers that a company can pull if they're trying to retain a team. And so that kind of brings me to something that Rory Sutherland, who's an ad man from I think Edelman, he did a number of lectures years ago. But one of the things he said is that in order for things to be sustainable in the future, we need to move from tangible value to intangible value. He calls it badge value, where you have things like social status, relationships, things, how people perceive you as being intangible value that you can provide to people in lieu of not having the resources to give someone tangible value. So for the people who are in this community, and even thinking back to the team we used to run at the old agency, there was a lot of dynamic personalities on the team. There was definitely some egos that needed to be assuaged. Mine was one of them. And the things that we did that did not involve pay or pizza parties often was helping people increase their sense of status and increase their sense of self-worth and value, providing training all the time. So that I remember one person on our team said, working here is like, going to graduate school, except that you get a paycheck.
And those are the things that, companies need to not lose sight of, because, it's work. We can't make time for professional development. We can't worry about training. We just have to do the work. And that's where you start to lose that motivation by the individuals. And so I would imagine, Chris, in that community that it's all volunteers, the benefits aside from, the content that they're fighting so hard for would be things like networking, would be things like experience, would be things like, a demonstration of skill sets. You mentioned to me that, you've identified a designer within the group who's been able to, probably create more things for their personal portfolio by volunteering for this group. And it's lower stakes in the sense that nobody's paying for it. So the feedback is going to be, less harsh. Like, I didn't pay you to do this thing. And so I would imagine that for a lot of the individuals in that group, those kinds of experiences are also what they're there for. It's the, what does it feel like to be part of an organized group? What does it feel like to organize a group? What does it look like to actually put together, these plans and, everything that's going into it to actually propose, here's what should happen. That's invaluable experience that they may not be able to get anywhere else. And so that, I feel like, as people start to lose their motivation, those are the things that they should be reminded of, in addition to the original mission of, here's why we all organized in the first place. When you're dealing with a team that's started to lose motivation, to your point, here are the trainings, here's the knowledge that you can't get elsewhere, that you can't get from a book, that you can't get from a course. Let me make time to sit with you, to share my experience, to help you boost your resume, boost your networking. Let me introduce you to people that I think you could learn something from, or, that you want to connect with. So there's a lot of ways to give back to your team to help keep them motivated that aren't financial, that aren't monetary.
Yep. One of the things I noticed very early on was initially the Discord group, very much like our Slack group, Analytics for Marketers, had just a very tight focus. Like, here's the thing we're going to, here's all the different channels for the different aspects of this project. And there were no, what we call work-life balance channels, right? There's no cooking channel. There's no, TV channel. There's no, this, that, or the other thing. And then about a week in, it seemed like people realized, we are also a social unit in addition to being sort of this mission task unit. And so we've had this, spawning of all these different social channels and stuff. And I think that's kind of the glue, to your point, that is helping to hold the core team together. The benefits from that, for example, there's one channel in there called Resume and LinkedIn, and people asking, like, how do I, how do I communicate this experience? And B, can someone look at my LinkedIn profile, tell me what I'm doing wrong? And I've been pitching in a fair amount of feedback on that channel. Like, here's how to do this with your LinkedIn and stuff like that. Here's how the LinkedIn algorithm works, so that people are definitely getting benefit from that. For me personally, I've got like 3 new chapters in the book I'm writing, just from experiences on this campaign. So it's being able to see, like, okay, in addition to new professional contacts and stuff, is a look of, here's a strategy for how to use these private communities to influence public social media. Like, that goes, this is cool. This goes right in the book.
So it's interesting because what you're getting out of the experience is different from what someone else is getting out of the experience. But, had someone, when you joined the group, sat you down and said, what do you want to get out of this? You've probably been like, I don't know, seems kind of cool. But now, as you've been in it, you're understanding what it is that you're gaining from being a part of this, community. You're getting, real insight that would then, be that knowledge transfer to other people. You can share that experience. You're getting the opportunity to do some mentoring, but also make, new connections outside of your usual network. And so it sounds like those are things that I know are important to you. And so if you sort of translate this back into a team who, you need to keep motivated, rather than asking the question, what do you want to get out of this experience? A better question to ask is, what's important to you? What's important to you in your personal life? What's important to you in your professional life? And listen for the responses they give, because it may not be a direct, clear line from, okay, you said that hanging out with your dog is important. I could do this exact thing for you. Like, there's going to have to be some, creative thinking there. But, for me, one of the most important things to me is a really strong work-life balance. And so if I was in that situation and the team needs to be motivated, someone said to me, what's important? I would say, not working 80 hours a week is really important to me. That would then be the role of the manager to figure out, okay, this is a resource we need to retain. This is a resource we need to keep motivated. This is a resource we need to ask more of. So where does that balance come into play? That's what would keep someone like me motivated, is knowing that the things that are important to me are valued by the company. Being forced into a networking event, not important to me. It's actually one of my worst nightmares because I'm such an introvert. That gives me a lot of anxiety. So if that's the benefit they're giving to me, then I feel even less motivated because I no longer feel heard as an individual as well. And that's the key, is making sure people feel heard, making sure you know what's important to them, and making sure they know what's in it for them as individuals.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, you may not be able to pay people more, but you can have people work less, right? And effectively, it's very simple. You can say, like, you can work the hours you want to work. If you need to be home with your dog between 10 and 2, great. Come in for the morning, head on out, come back in the afternoon. If obviously if you live close by,
sure,
things like that. That level of flexibility certainly helps. Listening to people, I think, is one of those really challenging things, because as a manager, particularly if you're a manager in a very high pressure, high tension situation, you're so overwhelmed yourself that you can't listen to somebody else. I remember, again, back in our agency days, I was on the road like 30 weeks of the year. I could not listen to the team. I literally could. I was simply not there
Uh-huh.
because I was out doing sales pitches all the time.
Right.
And so it's interesting now in this organization. I'm probably it's very strange. I'm one of the oldest people there. I'm also the only person of my gender there, which is interesting. And now with the benefit of not being under like intense pressure all the time, I can listen to people and watch and observe and like, oh, that's what Katie was trying to tell me 7 years ago about how to manage people.
Oh, I feel so
One of the other things,
validated.
exactly. One of the other things that's important to me is like doing cold starts. I think is something that to me is self-validation. As part of this, one of the first things I said, huge surprise, is, hey, do we have an email list? And people are like, what's that? Like, oh. So I stood up a free Substack account. And now it's, it's got hundreds of subscribers and things like that.
Uh-huh.
So it's this cold start of, okay, one of the questions you always ask when you've been established for a while is, are we getting the results because of the brand that we have or because of the skill we have as marketers? When you do a cold start, set up a new Twitter account that's not your name, a new email list and stuff, it tests your knowledge. Do I have the skill to make this grow with no brand, no way to assist it and stuff? You just got to do it with with skill alone. And so for me, that's again one of those the intangible benefits of doing something like this. I could definitely see in an agency situation, even in a company situation, giving somebody a new project. Like, okay, here's a side project. It's not revenue generating. We know it's not revenue generating. It's solely for your benefit. You can spend an hour or two a week just messing around with it, just to see if that's something that person wants. If it's something that they enjoy, letting them test their skills.
When I think back to our time when you were on the road, 30 weeks of a year, it was hard because I needed you to listen and you were in crisis mode all the time of, okay, I just need to fix things. And that wasn't what I needed from you. And so as a manager or as anyone in an organization who is tasked with keeping people motivated, that is something that you have to continually remind yourself of is, I'm not necessarily being asked to solve problems. I am just being asked to listen. And it's the same thing, like, in a relationship, like ask the person up front before you get into the conversation. Do you want me to offer suggestions to fix the thing, or do you just need me to listen? And, again, they may not know. And if they don't know, err on the side of just listening and not, what you should do about that? Here's 5 ways to solve that problem. Well, if you just tried this, it would fix the problem. That is unhelpful. It is 100% unhelpful. Well, if you just work less, you wouldn't be so burnt out. Jesus, why didn't I think of that? Oh my God. Like, it is not helpful in that moment. And so the biggest takeaways for anyone, if they are tasked with motivating, is to actively listen. Don't just wait for your turn to talk, but actively listen. Don't feel the need to fill in, the dead spaces. If the person stops talking for a minute, that's okay. Let the air be silent. Let them just sort of like process and finish their thoughts. Because as overwhelmed as you are, you've been asked to be put in this position so that you can then facilitate other people processing whatever they're feeling, especially in these companies that have now undergone massive layoffs. Motivation is at an all-time low. Why should I bother doing this? I'm probably next on the chopping block. And maybe that's true, but while you are still there, your job is to help people continually feel like they have a reason to show up every day.
What do you do when people have lost that motivation?
It's hard. It happens. And for some people, you can't help them get it back. Because ultimately, you are not responsible for them feeling motivated. And I know that sort of feels counterintuitive to what we're talking about. They are the only ones who can be motivated. You can guide them, you can give them reasons, but ultimately, they are the only ones who can find that inner motivation. So your job, so let's say I was talking with you and you're like, you know what, Katie, I just can't do this trust insights thing anymore. It's just, I don't see the point. No, in all seriousness, I don't see the point. We're headed into recession. We're losing clients. My job is to give you insight, is to listen and give you reasons to feel motivated. But ultimately, you're the only one who can decide whether or not it's going to be the right situation for you. So I could say things to you like, well, I have some really interesting ideas of other ways that we can bring in revenue, which is true. We'll talk about that later. I think that the work that you've been doing with this other community could really lend itself to opening doors into other industries. Is that work that you've enjoyed, or is that just work you felt like you've had to do? And so really just having an open conversation focused solely on you about things that make you happy in terms of the work, and me helping you understand and see that there are things that you enjoy about it, that it's not just all drudgery. And so then we focus on the drudgery and say, okay, what's not working? Well, what are the things we have to do? Well, let's work on those things together to knock those out so you can have more time to focus on the things you enjoy.
Who does that for the leaders of an organization? Because obviously in a chain of command, in a hierarchical organization, the person above you is supposed to help do that for you. Who does that for the leaders? Because they're often ones, particularly in any kind of movement or cause, where there is no one above. They're like, you're at the front of the pack.
It's lonely at the top. And I'm being only partially sarcastic. The higher up you go, the less support you have. And it's hard. It's very hard. And so that's where you then, as, the CEO, the leader, the manager, the director, then have to look around at your network. And maybe that's external to the organization that you're at. So for me personally, I have my friends, I have my husband, I'm fortunate that I have you and John, because we're all essentially equals. In the organization. We have roles to play, but, we rely on each other. But I've had to make it a point to find my own personal communities to talk things through, to find that support when I'm faced with making, tough decisions that fall on me. But Trust Insights is a small company. Like, let's take Salesforce as an example. The CEO of Salesforce can't necessarily run all of their thoughts and feelings past the other executives, because that's just not how those companies work. And a lot of things have to be kept under lock and key. A lot of things can't be talked about until they happen. And so I would imagine that, they have to have a very small, trusted group of advisors, probably their families, people who they can really talk these things through with, that are outside of the environment. And that's a very healthy way to, deal with it. So like for you, Chris, if you were in my position, I would expect that you would have a circle, a community outside of Trust Insights that was supporting you, even just to be a sounding board, not necessarily like a true board, but just like people who and you trust to be like, hey, can I run something past you? Or hey, faced with a difficult decision, can we just talk about it?
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like we've got a lot of good intangibles to help leaders and individual contributors within an organization maintain the conditions for motivation. But like you said, it is ultimately up to the person, every individual, and where they are emotionally to be able to harvest those conditions into staying motivated. If you've got some stories or some ideas about how you have maintained motivation for yourself or others, pop on over to our free Slack group. Go to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, where you and over 3,000 other marketers are helping motivate each other every single day. And wherever it is you watch or listen to the show, if there's a channel you would rather have it on, go to trustinsights.ai/TI podcast. You can find us on all major channels. And while you're there, leave us a rating or review. It helps share the show. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.